Hey everybody, Flash McVay here. Welcome to another episode of the Afterburn Podcast. We are on our Evolution of Seed series, part 3, and I am here with a guest I am incredibly excited to talk to. Fellow Tomahawk 16th Weapons School grad with Sonny Blinkinsop, veteran from Operation Allied Force, Weasel extraordinaire, and we're going to talk about kind of the evolution of Seed as we've already talked about with Vietnam, Desert Storm, and now into roughly the third kind of Weasel shooting war that we saw throughout history, and the evolution and the challenges and successes, failures, anything like that in Allied Force. So Blink, thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate it, and we're going to have a great episode. I'm sure that our listeners will enjoy listening to.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me on the show.
Hey, no problem. So just to get started, how'd you get involved with the military? Like, how'd you get your commission? Pilot training, going through kind of the B course, was the F-16 your number one choice? How'd you get into weaseling per se?
Sure. So I was fortunate enough to get selected for the Air Force Academy back in the early 80s, but I wasn't quite smart enough to go directly in. So I spent a year at the prep school at the academy, and then moved into do my 4 years of service or time at the all-boys school there. I graduated in 1988, and then I got selected to go to pilot training. I went to Laughlin, really enjoyed Laughlin. Great place to let you concentrate on your life because there's nothing else to do. And I graduated number one in my class, and we had an A-10, an Eagle, and an F-16. I picked an F-16 because I had an instructor that I really respected in the T-38 side, and we had a lot of talks about where the F-16 was going in the future. And the mission just kind of excited me just to get into moving mud at the time. Wasn't even thinking about weaseling. So I went off to Holloman, did my lead-in fighter training in the AT-38, been a few jets there, and then went to MacDill, and when MacDill was an RTU, and went through RTU in a B model. I'm sorry, a Block 30 model with the 61st Top Dogs. And when I graduated, I went to Moody. So back when Moody had 3 or 4 squadrons, and it was the 347th Fighter Wing at the time. I was in the 68th. We were transitioning at that time in the 1990 timeframe from Block 30s to Block 40s. So eventually I got selected to go on and be an ECP, an electronic combat pilot, flight lead. I was fortunate enough to get to go to Lantern School out at Luke. So our mission was low altitude night engagements. Still no targeting pods, but we did a lot of FLIR work and TFR work. And then from Moody, I went to Misawa, and I spent 3.5 years at Misawa. Misawa was the 432nd Fighter Wing at the time. Now that's part of the RPAs out there at Creech.
Yep.
And while I was there, Gary Nordo came on board, and this was after Desert Storm. He really liked the Weasel mission, and he went and got the 35th Fighter Wing moniker and tail flash to come over to Misawa, and he also got the WW tail flash. So that really, from that perspective in my life, that was somebody who did a great job in leading the mission and really focused the guys on what we were doing. Because at the time, we were still a little unsure of what our mission was. Block 30, Block 50, are we dropping bombs? Are we shooting harms? What are we doing? And Nordo came in and said, we're Wild Weasels. We're taking on this role. We're going to learn everything we can. And that's our charter. So I was with the 13th Fighter Squadron, did a bunch of seed learning from guys from Desert Storm. We can talk about that later. And initially talked learning about harm targeting pods, harm in general, and all the capabilities of the Block 50 compared to the Block 30. After Misawa, I went to weapon school, graduated out of weapon school, got to pay my penance at Kunsan. So I went to Kunsan in the 80th. I was a JUVAT. Part of that role as a JUVAT, if those have been there, was shooting dumb harms into North Korea. So I got to use all my expertise with harm targeting system on shooting a dumb harm off of Block 30. That was kind of our wartime mission, but obviously everything there is also revolves around close air support, any type of interdiction mission, DCA type of mission. So a lot to work on at Kunsan. It was a great assignment. I loved it. And then from there, I went to Spangdahlem. And at Spangdahlem, that was the 52nd Fighter Wing. I was with the 23rd Fighter Squadron, and they were purely a harm Weasel type of squadron at the time. So I spent my time at Spangdahlem. That's where I did most of my weaseling and OAF that we'll talk about here in a little bit. And then my career told me I needed to go to IDE. So I went off to my intermediate. I spent a year in school in the UK learning how to speak English and spending some time with the Brits. And then I stayed on afterwards as an exchange guy in their Joint Force headquarters during OIF and OEF, and was a strategist there. I got called back to Nellis by Soap Dolan, who was the commander at the time. So I returned back to the 16th Tomahawks. I was the DO for about a year and a half. Went through my my IPUG, got beat up for a couple months there on IPUG. A little humility again, and then
That's
eventually
right.
when Soap moved on, I fleeted up to be the commander of the 16th, and got to enjoy that for a couple of years. Had some great instructors, unbelievable students coming through. Really good time to be at the Tomahawks. And then from there, my career kind of took me off into non-flying world, where I was a fellow in a think tank out in DC for a year. From there, I went to Turkey, spent a year in Turkey in a NATO KOC doing director of operations, doing air policing missions underground. And then from there, my last assignment was as an air attaché to a U.S. embassy in London. And I did that for 3 years and then retired. And that was in 2013. So it seems like it went by in a whirlwind, but talking through it again, it brings up a lot of great memories.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Now, and kind of saying as you notice is the guys we talked about, like Curly and those guys, Moody, all these same squadrons that have Weasel history are the same. Like, so these guys kind of had the same, whether they were flying F-105s, F-4s, all these different things, like learning how to do it with the F-16s. A lot of the stuff taking you to Moody, where it's now an A-10 base, potentially an F-35 base going into the future. And so these places on, you have like 50, 60 years now, going on 70 years of Weasel history. That history is rooted in the same like regions of the world. Everybody kind of goes in, they learn, and kind of go from there. So one thing I wanted to ask you about was there any transitioning F4G guys like around Misawa, like you talked about Northern North, but was there any of the Phantom guys that were present that had transitioned to the F-16 that you could draw direct experience from when you guys were kind of transitioning and the F-16 was starting to take on the Weasel mission around the 94, 95, 96 timeframe?
Yeah, great question. We didn't have a lot of guys. The one guy who really made an impact on me personally was a guy named Jack Patterson, went by Slap. He was in the 35th out of George during Desert Storm. Bull Post was another guy. Jim Post was there. He was at Spangdahlem when the what they referred to was the Little Buddy program, where they would have a Viper next to a G model. So we had some experience, but not as much as I think Shaw had quite a few more guys than we did. And that was a strange time in the Viper because we're also getting crossflow guys from other MDSs. So we had B1 guys come in, buff guys, C-130 guys. So a lot of other cross pollination into the Viper world. A-10 guys like yourself, So that was a weird time. We didn't have a lot of direct Weasel experience. But those guys that were there were instrumental in making that transition and bringing a lot of the lessons from the old Weasel squadrons that they learned their efforts or their lessons from the guys from Vietnam, and it's kind of a pass down word of mouth and adapting your aircraft to achieve the mission with the changes that we have in sensors or weapons or anything else.
Yeah, and then kind of from a weapons officer perspective, since like the early weapons officers in the Weasel mission that had never done the mission before themselves,
Right.
what was their kind of technique path to get a squadron ready to kind of transition from being a block 30, block 40 into like getting block 50s, interrogators and HTS pods and things like that. Like, what did your guys' training look like, kind of from a weapons officer perspective, getting new guys into the Viper and then teaching them how to be Weasels with that
Yeah.
experience that you also had from the older Weasels, if you will?
Yeah. So the training was, so first you had to learn about the Block 50. So,
Yep.
that was a pretty big leap engine wise, avionics, radars, a lot more capability. Initially, we didn't have interrogators. We didn't have targeting pods. The harm targeting system, was in its infancy. So
Yep.
it was almost like a boat anchor on the aircraft. Obviously it became better over the years, but a lot of it on the training side was getting guys to understand the airplane, employ the airplane first, and then lump on the sensors and then lump on the missions. So that kind of was the mentality is get guy, same reason we do BFM and we do basic surface attack at the range, right? You get used to seeing a sight picture over and over and over. So a lot of what we did on the transition to the Weasel role was getting people comfortable with the aircraft. And another big factor, I know personally that the folks that I was with at Misawa, we spent a ton of time in the weapons task trainer, the WTTs, that
Yep.
probably are, it's probably a boat anchor in somebody's squadron now, but anytime I had extra time on my hands, I would jump in that thing and I would work through the muscle memory of the HOTAS, what screens I want up, what's it look like, what's the symbology look like for harm employment versus an AMRAAM employment. That was always a concern, is that when you push that pickle button, are you in the right mode? Are you in air-to-air mode? Are you in air-to-ground mode? So all those things going through your head and constantly harping on guys to get in there and practice. And then hate to say it, but the bar was always a good place afterwards. On a Friday night, guys would get together. We get the chalkboard out, have academics, guys like Mark Klein, Calvin Klein, Norm Anderson, Dean Anderson, Sluggo Thomas. If you guys know Bill Thomas, another phenomenal seed guy that kind
Yeah.
of got rolled into the mission, and all those guys picked it up quickly and embraced it. So I think a lot of it was a mindset change, like you've referred to in other shows, the mindset change of being a Weasel versus an F-16 pilot. I think that was some of the culture change also for us.
Yeah, that's actually I'd like to get your thoughts on that, because that's a theme that I've seen throughout this discussion, and a theme that I've recognized in myself. Like, I was an F-16, I was an A-10 guy and then an F-16 guy, and then very quickly after I got to Osan, the Fiends, being a Harump guy up north with the chilies and everything, didn't have to do a Kunsan except if I wanted to party. But the very quickly, like, the seed mission came to Osan, based on Misawa being able to get there in time and all that kind of stuff. But we didn't do it to the extent of like being true Weasels, and it was kind of a funny thing, jokes aside. But once I started kind of getting into it, and then truly going to weapons school and being Joe Seed, going to Shaw afterwards, is like I felt a tangible shift from being an F-16 pilot to being a Weasel.
Yeah.
And that has been like the dominant mission set in my career. And is that something that was a quick process, an easy process? Was that kind of to an individual that you recognize as like, nope, we're Weasels now, and this is awesome. We recognize the lineage, we recognize the importance of the mission set, and like, what was like the culture shift, if you can expand on that, inside of the squadron once you guys became Weasels?
Yeah. So some of that there was still the holdover from the F4G. F4G at the time when Block 50s with HCS came on board, there was no comparison. The G model was a far superior Weasel platform to the F-16. So there was a lot of, we're better than you, but hey, sorry, man, the G model's gone. So we got to live with what we got, So the mentality, first of all, is I'm a single seat fighter. So I've got to manage all this stuff myself. And second of all is I've got to stick my nose into a hornet's nest. Whereas up till now, my training has always told me to threat react. Do a glib or do some kind of threat reaction to get away from a threat. Now my mentality has to change to say, that guy's shooting at me. I've got something I can fire back. So stick my nose in there in the most effective and efficient way I can to get my nose down and lay something down that's going to make that sight turn off. So that whole thing is a cultural mindset. It was truly a leadership from the guys that brought that from the G model into the Viper community to get guys to embrace that. We already talked about that. It's really, hey, this is the noble effort. This is a noble mission, and we're going to be really good at it. It's going to take us time to get up to speed, but once we get there, we're going to embrace it, and we're going to look for new tactics on how to make compensate for the limitations that we have in the aircraft and the sensors, and still have good tactics and ways to attack the IADs until we can get more capability on board later on. So you'll see over the years. Go ahead.
Oh, no, sorry.
Well, I was going to say, you'll see, over the years as we got new variants of the HARM, there's improvements in the HARM and the software. There's improvement in the Block 50 with, hard to believe when I first got in, we didn't have data link. We didn't have any kind of interrogator. We didn't have any kind of mids, the Link 16, all that stuff was like out in the future, right? The Eagles had that, everybody else had that, but the G guy or the Weasels didn't have that. So there was a lot of stuff we had to do workarounds on, knowing that eventually we would get that technology. But a guy who grew up in this world in the Block 50 understood where all that came from. And so as you lumped more and more on the aircraft, the better we were at absorbing that new technology and creating better tactics for what we were given, if that makes sense.
Oh no, that makes total sense, and that's the evolution, right? Because like we talked to the guys from Vietnam, and like you got the F-100 and the F-105, and then all in the background, like Project Wild Weasel is just strapping more technology, like developing technology, creating antennas, strapping them onto a fighter. And now being able to actually detect things, and instead of where it goes from, I know where the SAMs are, I know where the target area is, I'm going to go in there to get shot at because that's the only way I'm going to find it. And so once I actually see the SAM site, gun, rocket, all the things that we're amazing. And now it's just like, okay, while effective, not the most efficient and maybe smart, and like, you got to be shitting me as the moniker goes. But then as you start to be able to have better geolocation and detection capabilities and technology, you become more effective, you become more survivable, you become more lethal. But then now it's interesting that as the F4G comes along and then goes away, we actually took a small step backward in capability as the stuff is being integrated onto the F-16, because the internal, like on the jet sensors weren't physically there. It became a podded solution that was, like you said, in its infancy, and kind of going from there. So for a little bit, we took a small step backward. But as like when we talk about this technology, as we're kind of going through now, we're getting closer to 97, 98, Operation Allied Force, like things like that. Is how effective was the technology on your aircraft as far as just like with the end objective of being able to have the jet tell you where a SAM site is?
Not good.
Not good.
In a nutshell. So I was thinking about this last night, when I was prepping up, thinking through, 15, 20 years ago, how things looked then versus how things are evolving now. And I think back, what was our priority as far as sensors? And it's probably not earth shattering to you, but my best sensor was still my eyeball or my wingman.
Yeah.
Or the strike package that's 50 miles from me calling out that they're reacting to something off of a bullseye cut. So my ears, my eyes are still my best sensors. Probably still true today. And at the time, the next best thing would be an offboard capability, an early warning, an AWACS for somebody that's getting some feeds from outside that they can articulate or pass information to us. Again, no data link, no Link 16. So a lot of it is understanding where you in relationship to the bullseye and trying to plot that on, no kidding, on my knee board at nighttime, trying to figure out where that is on the bull and where's that going to impact either the strike package or my flight. So that was the next thing. And then the next sensor was actually our RWR. That was more effective than pretty much anything else I had on the airplane as far as the sensor. We had 56 mics. That would give you the first indication to maybe start looking somewhere else. And the next thing I would call up would be a harm as a sensor. Hard to
Yep.
believe. Harm as a sensor. I mean, as long as you're pointing down track, you're going to get indications immediately on whether somebody's looking at you or not. And then the last thing we would use is a harm targeting system. And again, those things improved, especially during OAF, during Allied Force. Eglin did a great job on the test community to pump out new OFPs, send out new updates and patches that both improve the harm and also improve the sensing on the pod to make it faster and the sweep rates much better. But that was kind of my, at the time, that was kind of the flow through of how I prepared to go into combat with what I had.
Yeah, no, because you're as effective as you're as effective as the technology that you possess, and how you bring all of that together, and all these things that you're looking at is when we're talking about how the guys in Vietnam did it, is basically what they were looking at is just like, it is that way. Right. like as it kind of went, it was like, hey, now it's in this 45-degree quadrant. Hey, now it's like 30 degrees. And as far as range is concerned, it was how loud it was, where it was in the rings, like all these different things, and how you had to bring all this technology together. Like you talked about, the F4G went from a 2-person game to a single person, to a single seat fighter pilot having to process all this information. And that's what we see in the F-35 now, is all the data that the F-35 gives you is you become a data processor and a pilot.
Right.
And so it's an interesting game as far as that is concerned. What did the flight lead and instructor syllabus look like at the time? Like going from being a Weasel, like if you came from another base, a Block 30, which is interesting in the F-16, as folks know, some bases do seed, some bases don't. It's divided like that, and it's based on kind of like the model of F-16 you have, where like if you're a Block 40 flight lead, and then you move to Shaw or a Masawa or a Spang, you might go through a seed flight lead upgrade or a seed IPUG. But what did the Weasel upgrade kind of look like at that time as far as training is concerned?
Yeah. So flight lead versus IP, the IP upgrade, at least at the time, more of that was spent on mission prep. So how do you teach a guy to build a load file? How do you teach a guy to prepare where he's going to set up a cap or maximize his sensors downrange for both air threats and surface threats? So a lot of the iPug was going through that kind of stuff. Typical iPug is you're always being evaluated. So you would go out, you would do what you briefed, come back. And as long as you could debrief to where you made mistakes, either in the mission planning or the execution of your mission, you're going to move through. And those are everybody was always learning on every one of those missions. There's nobody that had it figured out completely. So the flight lead was a little less arduous. That was more of, can I put my airplane and my flight, my 2-ship, my 4-ship in the right position? Can I manage them? Can I manage my weapons and my fuel to make sure I'm on time long enough to support the package? Or could I do other types of tactics, like a flow through tactic? If I had a string of bombers or something going through, could I embed myself with them and make sure I'm in a position to employ? So kind of a mentality shift. One was really focused on employment, not only you but around you, and the other one as an instructor was more of, how do I teach guys how to do this mission with all the sensors I have and the time you had to spend on the I hate to say it, the MSS or the AFMIS, whatever it used to be called, the jumps, all those programs we had back in the,
Absolutely.
So that was kind of the difference, I think, from my point of view, anyway.
Nice. Well, and now we kind of moving on into the actual OAF kind of time frame. So for our listeners, probably familiar with Operation Allied Force. So where are we in the world, like geopolitically? Like, so from around 94, like the mid to the later 90s, Slobodan Milosevic in Yugoslavia, ethnic cleansing campaign against Kosovo Albanians as well as Kosovo Serbs, and NATO and President Clinton. We don't love that. Like, not loving that's going on in the world. And it began as kind of a humanitarian decree, if you will, and a request. I'm going to butcher this, but it's like the Robelais Accords. It's like, hey, sign these things, stop doing what you're doing, or possible consequences are going to be coming your way. Milosevic declined to sign that, did not want to do that. So there was a deadline. And then, so now from 24 March 1999 to now 10 June 1999, so approximately just about a 2-month, couple-day campaign of just bombing of Yugoslavia. So with the intent to again kind of get them to capitulate, and now also potentially create a Kosovo state where these refugees can actually go and have a sovereign state. So that's what's happening in the world. And we elect to now go have Operation Allied Force. That's the NATO name of the operation. The American name of the operation, Noble Anvil, is what we called it, as far as just like the American side of the house kind of going in. And it was an American-led coalition in NATO pushing in as a bombing campaign. So we're talking, this is post-Desert Storm. So we're talking what is involved here, like all the capabilities that the Air Force can bring to bear: B-2s, F-117s, Eagles, and Vipers, and AWACS, and RC-135s, and the Navy's bringing Prowlers. The Growler was starting to become a little bit of a thing, like, or not really, but talking about Hornets. So still got Prowlers out there, kind of doing some of these things as a coalition is concerned. So that's where we are in the world. We're conducting bombing campaigns. And so as you guys are going in, you're in Spang at this time. So you're in USAFE as the premier Weasel squadron in USAFE. So what was the lead up to the war in your guys' squadron? Like, was there warning, a little bit of like a training pipeline or training cycle of going into this? And then as far as what you guys knew about the threat. So like you're going to war against Yugoslavia, and like what was your guys' intent or kind of knowledge of the threat? And did you do any specific training going up into this? And what was it just like in the bar that during that time?
Wow, that's a loaded question. So there's a lot there, and amazingly, I think you got all the history right. By the way, it is a very complex part of the world, as anybody has ever looked at it knows. So we're on the heels of the Bosnia-Herzegovina thing back in '94, the Dayton Accords. All that stuff is happening, right? And Slobo's in there trying to take out the Kosovo Albanians. All the agreements. It was a UN effort first.
Yep.
Obviously, with Russia and China, they're gonna balk at that. So it switched to a NATO, Article 5 kind of deal. And Tony Blair was a big player in that in the UK, as far as a humanitarian genocide, basically, is what they were trying to prevent. So that's kind of the political background. Me personally, I arrived in Spangdahlem in the early part of February from Kunsan. So I just spent a year out at Kunsan flying Block 30s. I show up in Spangdahlem. My wife is there with my little kids, 18 months up to 6 years old. And she's got the house set up, ready to go take a little bit of break, maybe a couple weeks, a little vacation. I'm there for about, 4 or 5 days, just enough to get my new patch, get my tags to get into the vault. And in the middle of the night, I get a call from Terry New, who was the ops group commander, the vice ops group commander at the time. And he said, grab your bag, you're Advon. So
Yep.
I'd been with my wife, less than a week. I had to search around for my bag because I don't think I had it built, but it was no kidding. Grab your green bag and hit the road. My wife said, when are you going to be back? I said, I don't know. I'm probably going to call you for a while. I won't be able to tell you what's going on. She's been around long enough to know that was happening. And I met up with Norm Anderson, Terry New, and we departed for Aviano in the middle part of February. So this was right as it was leading up to the Serbs are being ornery and obstinate on this whole thing, and we see this thing is going to happen pretty quick. So the emphasis at the time was, can we do this whole thing with purely air power? Big argument whether air power could control and win wars or not. There's lots of different arguments. I used to believe one thing, now I believe something different. But the idea was minimum risk to the airmen and to the Army folks that are going to go in and have to secure this area. So let's make this as minimal risk as we possibly can, and basically bomb them to their knees until they capitulate and say, okay, we're done, which is what happened. So so rolling into, we went to Aviano. Aviano at the time was basically the triple nickel and the 5/10. The 81st was actually flying A-10. So Goldie Hawn and those guys were deployed with us. They were actually down. I think they went to Brindisi in southern Italy eventually. So we had Spangdahl and buddies that were on the peninsula of Italy with us, and we did a lot of exchanging information with them. So leading up, we had. So here we are mid-February, bedding down the Squadron. The Triple Nickel sponsored us, hosted us. The other part of the 23rd Squadron was in northern Watch, so northern Iraq, and those guys were recovered home to prepare to go to Aviano to get ready for the OAF. So all these things are happening. It's in my mind, it's like complete chaos. So now I've had one flight in the Block 50 since weapons school, since Misawa. So it's been, 3 or 4 years since I've really done a Block 50 mission. And I'm trying to learn all this stuff over again because, the Viper community at the time, you'd bounce around different missions, different capabilities, and it's a very perishable skill.
Yes.
Luckily, I had some good guys, Norm Anderson, a few other guys that were very good at bringing up to speed. So we get bedded down. And then Aviano turns into what Dan Leaf, the wing commander at the time, called the USS Aviano. It turned into an aircraft carrier of airplanes. I think at one time they probably had 200 airplanes on an airfield that has one runway. So you can imagine the anxiety of taking off and wondering if you're actually going to recover back to that base.
Yeah.
There's one blown tire, one hydraulic leak, anything like that, it shuts down. Now you got to divert, and it's a mess. So those are all things they're going through. And then training wise, we did initially we did some work with, as soon as we got the aircraft, the Block 50s bedded down in the Hazes. We started doing some work with the CGs, the 5/10 and the triple nickel, and working with those guys. Really, they taught us the area, did a lot of local area orientation. How do you get in and out of Aviano? How do you get down the Adriatic? Where do you go to get to the refueling points? A lot of that was just getting us comfortable with the area, just like you would at Nellis on a red flag or something, going out and doing your LEO. And we did that. And then we started running intercepts just to get used to what might happen with the radars. What do the weapons ranges look like? What's the weather look like? All those things that kind of build your SA going in. And then we started getting serious about mission planning. And that was when probably 3 or 4 days prior to when the first night kicked off the 24th. So I'd say it was probably the 19th of March, somewhere in there, is we got hot and heavy into mission planning, and we were off and running.
Yeah. And what did that, because this is interesting to me, for our listeners, like the reason that it doesn't necessarily matter that Blink is only there for a couple days and he's shipped off is like, you're the weapons officer, right? Like, yep. And so you're going in. And so what did this NPC look like? Was it, because there actually was a document that came out of Allied Force that I think is required reading for Weasels, like 3-1 Allied Force lessons learned. I think I might've seen your name on there as well. What did this NPC look like? Like how many people, like what individuals are effectively truly tactically planning this war?
Yeah. So I didn't mention Dog Kennel, I don't think. So Steve Kennel was actually the weapons officer of the 23rd. And so he had the job of getting the squadron spun up. I was just, I'm a patch wearer, but I'm just, another Joe Bag of Donuts. So Dog was really the guy that was running the show as far as the weapons officer. But I was tagged to be the mission planning guy because I didn't have a lot of time in theater. Made sense. I understood the mission. I understood how to plan all that. So let Dog and those guys run the first few nights of the war because they're up to speed. They know what they're doing. They've been around. So I had no problem with that.
And they know their guys.
Oh, yeah. And they know the guys. They've been flying the airplanes. They know the maintenance crews. All that stuff is. So it makes total sense. So they tagged me and 2 MQT wingmen to go run the seed mission planning cell at Aviano. And the thing that was interesting about this was, so this was a NATO these are NATO missions on NATO ATOs. But as you mentioned early on in this interview, we also had F-117s and B-2s involved. But we couldn't tell the NATO partners that they were involved. They couldn't see the ATO that they were on. So interesting, the MPC cell had one area that was pretty good size, bunch of mission planning tables, computers, all that kind of stuff. And then there's a green door, no kidding, green door into another room where you had your U.S. only packages being built. The only guys that were common between those two were the Weasels, were the Block 50 guys. So I would spend most of my time bouncing between the U.S. only side and the NATO side to make sure that we were deconflicting packages. A lot of people didn't realize that was happening, and there was no way to do that other than one or two guys actually keeping it in their head where people were, what altitudes, what timelines, what bombs were being dropped. All that stuff was kind of being built. So it was a real challenge. It was a lot of fun, but it was a challenge. And so I did that. I did mission planning, and then for probably 5 days or so, 5 or 6 days. And then Dog and I got into a rotation where he would cover 3 or 4 days, and then I would go fly, and then I would come back and he would go fly, and we'd do that. We did that for 78 days straight. And it was actually a really good way to do it, because I would come back after flying a little bit and going, hey, here's where I saw problems, and he would do the same thing, and we would adjust tactics and how we set up packages and things.
Yeah, no, that's that, and we are absolutely going to get into the limitations and maybe some wouldn't say failures, but some failures maybe, just like contributing factors, if you will, to maybe some debrief points of that endeavor. So when you guys are out there, what did the typical Weasel mission in Allied Force look like? Package size, like you're just going on a one each strike package, non-LO strike package into Yugoslavian territory or held territory or anything like that. Because I do know a little bit of history, which I'll touch on here in a minute. But what did your typical mission look like in OAF?
Can we take a pause?
Yes.
Is this a good time I can take a pause and go hit the bathroom real quick?
Yes, that's a good pause.
Are you able to break it up?
Oh yeah, we can edit.
Give me 2 seconds. I'll be right back.
You got it.
I got a 6-year-old bladder.
Oh, you're fine. You're fine. All right, so we're kind of looking at like the contributing factors, if you will, of Allied Force. So when we're looking at the typical strike package, what would you say was the typical Weasel mission and strike package going into Yugoslavia?
So a couple different phases, as you would expect. Early on, didn't know what to expect from the Serbs, from the whether they would stand their IEDs up first and keep their aircraft down, or if they would launch their aircraft first, or put everything up at one time. So a lot of the early development of the packages was getting C model Eagles up first. Let those guys go out there and do some sweep. Put the C package embedded inside of a strike package instead of setting up caps. And early on, we did a lot of flow tactics where we would, so you'd have the lead strikers, you'd have the seed assets far enough back that they could see underneath the strikers, the lead part of the strike package, and be in a position to shoot, but also in a position that if somebody reacted, they could either, get them away from the area, give them some awareness on the radio about what is out in front of them. Because we didn't know what the Serbs were going to do. They were pretty wily. So that'd be the first two ship. And then the next two ship would be behind the package, kind of as the lone wolf coming up behind his, kind of making sure everybody is swept underneath. We could keep sensors down. And then building the package to where the package didn't do a lot of turns, but had enough turns that you could make up timing based on those turns. So it was kind of straight in, straight out, hit the targets. Reattacks would be a requirement to set up a cap, counter-rotating cap, different locations until the reattack occurred, and then everybody would haul ass out. So that was initially for about the first 2 weeks or so. I can't remember what day it was, but eventually we got the B2s coming in. And the big thing when the 117 was there, initially was not to highlight the 117, but to be close enough by that our big aluminum airplane would attract the attention away from the 117. So we did the same thing when the B2s came in. And in that case, we got in way before the B2s showed up so we could distract the enemy. The B2s would come in from a completely different area, different altitude, and drop their load and leave. And I don't think the Serbs ever even knew they were there because they were concentrating on us out there juking and jiving and, jettisoning tanks and shooting harms. Meanwhile, they're getting pummeled by a B2 at 50,000 feet or whatever they were flying. So that was kind of the mentality at first for the first few weeks, and then it got to the point where really a majority of the work was kind of floating down into the Kosovo area, kind of north of Kosovo. A-10s were doing a lot of work looking at convoys because a lot of these displaced people were moving out towards Macedonia. And so the A-10s were key in interdicting those convoys if there were any ones that were, had military equipment in them. And then we turned into almost like killbox flow. So remember, killbox in OIF was, hey, you get a sector, go out. It's not CAS because you don't have eyes on the ground to deconflict. But if there's a bad guy that you can identify, and you can stick your nose in and kill him, you can kill him. So the same thing happened in Kosovo. I wouldn't call it a kill box, as more of it was like a contained interdiction mission, if you will. So now we had guys coming in multiple packages, but you still only had 4 Weasels. So you would go in, support one package, that package would come out, you would hit the tanker, go get some more gas while the second group of guys were getting formed up. They would push in and we'd get back in time to either push with them or we would have another 2-ship join our 4 ships. So you had 6 total. And then you'd start doing kind of like we did in Southern Watch and other areas where you're constantly rotating that 6-ship to have at least 2 guys or 4 guys on station at a given time. So that became a little more dynamic, and those missions became really long, 3 to 4 hours of vol. So in the end of the day, we're doing 7-8 hour missions, getting into country, go in, support, rip that off your D board, bring up the new package. Who are these guys? What are they doing? What target areas? All that. So you're constantly updating yourself on who you're supporting. So there was kind of two big phases that, if I remember right, kind of drove the planning for that.
Yeah, and then kind of the thought of like the mission planning, and as you say, SEED is an incredibly mission planning intensive mission. Is intel support of SEED is. So what did you guys go out the door pretty confident? I know. So it's kind of this evolution that we've started talking about. You got your SA1, your S25 system, then you have your S75 system, your SA2, and then now like the threat of the day, if you will, for the Yugoslavian Air Force was you had your mobile 6s and 8s and all that, but it was actually the S125, also known as the SA3. So that was kind of like the with some SA2s kind of sprinkled in there. So the SA3 was kind of the threat of the day, mainly in fixed sites. However, SA3 is a little bit more tear downable than a fan song. But like, what did you guys know? Did you guys have pretty good confidence about where these sites were every day, or what intel support was given to you guys going out the door on a typical mission?
Yeah, a great question. So initially we had a good idea before the war kicked off what they had there. We knew the AOB, the EOB. We kind of knew where they were located, and they were operating within normal operational parameters. So we had a pretty good idea. As soon as things kicked off, everything changed. So they went dead. I mean, they went silent. They were using the Giraffe. I think it's a French-made early warning type of radar. So the Giraffes were so we started really focusing on Giraffes because we figured that was, the Serbs are pretty smart guys. They've got some pretty good operators. So our thought was, can we pop the Giraffes? Can we take the Giraffes out and kind of poke their eyes out a little bit to make them bring up their other early warning or their acquisition radars? So now we can start identifying where the sites are. Giraffes were really hard to target. There's tall, thin device radar. And a funny story is early on, it just came to my mind when you talked about that was early on when we thought about giraffes, we're like, how do we kill the giraffe? Because it's really hard to target with a harm. But we can shoot it with the Maverick. Hey, let's load up some Mavericks. Not thinking about all those things that go into a Maverick. One is limited airspeed.
limited G's. When's the
Yep.
last time a guy called up a Maverick and actually employed it? When's the last time he employed it at night without lights and being shot at? So we had one guy in the squadron that we configured his airplane to be the Maverick shooter, and we did this for like, I think maybe 2 or 3 days. And his whole job was to go out and find the giraffes and kill them with the Maverick. Didn't work. It's a great idea, but I mean, we were asking a lot out of this guy, Mulligan, to
One guy.
One guy, and because he was the most, and he was an Osan guy, so he was fairly recent from Osan. He had a lot of time with the Mavericks, but man, it was really crazy. So going back to the question about the EOB was initially giraffes. And then what we've discovered was we could get pretty good intel from off sources, other assets would tell us where things were located. Not great, again, on perfect location, but kind of generically where they were. So we could at least set up some rings to think about where, when are we sticking our nose into a threat ring versus when are we theoretically out of a threat ring. But what we found out after a few days is the parameters started changing. And it was really hard to track the SAMs because the SERMs were actually adjusting PRF, RF, PRI, RI. All that stuff was changing. So our intel guys were really smart, and they started tracking them through, what we would refer to as a fingerprint. So they could fingerprint these guys based on their operating parameters, and they could watch them move around. And we started calling them by name. I don't remember what the names were, but Site Bravo is now located here versus he was here yesterday. So we kind of get an idea of how much they're moving around. Intel support in that way was really good. The other part of Intel support was getting any kind of video from either the Strike Eagles that were involved, the CGs, A-10s, anybody that had video that could show us where they were seeing firing from the ground, either AAA or SAMs, was really helpful in helping us understand their tactics, because what they were doing, you may have a follow-on question on this, is they would get an idea with their early warning radar about what altitude you were at, roughly. And then they would command detonate their SA-3s without guiding them at that altitude. So they would have a general idea where you were, what altitude you were. They'd lob an SA-3 up into your package area and then command detonate it to try and get it to, the frag to hit your flight. You get that last second spike from an SA-3 with a guidance going to it, and that was it. So you had maybe 2 or 3 seconds, and then boom, there's a big explosion somewhere near you that was trying to throw shrapnel at. So these guys are pretty wily. Yeah, that was a tough problem.
Yeah, that's wild. However, that from the other side that's a degraded state for our listeners. That's a degraded state of taking a shot. The highest PK shot is truly guiding a missile towards an aircraft and being able to actually have the whole system work. So from an ASB to a battle management to a weapons control of an SA-3 taking a shot, fully guided towards an aircraft, that's your high PK probability of kill shot. These guys, why did they do that? They did that because they knew that if they turned their radars on, Weasels are in town. And
right.
So it put them into a degraded state, and they come in. And so did you guys have any tactics once you recognized that was occurring, did you have any tactics to counter that? Or is it now hey, we're going to get no radar indications on HTS or off-board RJ that's going to be able to see this radar, but now eyeballs and other things going out there and harms the sensor maybe. But what did you guys do as far as tactically to counter that tactic of them countering your guys being out there?
So the big thing was truly doing suppression. So we would lob harms up and try and keep harms in the air long enough for the package to get in and out and suppress them from ever turning on their radars. Because they still had to turn their radar on to command detonate. So they would turn off completely.
That last
keep it clean, right? Yeah. So you keep the airways clean, get the strikers in and out. Meanwhile, the harms are just flying in. I think we've probably, as a total package for the whole war, I think maybe there was 750, 800 ARM shot, and there was about 800 SAM shot. So it was a trade-off. So that was one way you could kind of keep the threat airborne, keep something in their face all the time so they wouldn't turn on. That was one thing. And then later on, once we started getting the Block 40s had a data link, and the Vipers had a data, I should say the Weasels had a data link We did a little bit of work about how to communicate that. So if we could get an HTS hit long enough to range it in, we could data link it over to the CGs that we were packaged with now. So this is a truly a CD'd or a I'm trying to think what the other term is, that hunter killer mentality.
Yep.
So now we could data link the the coordinates to the CG models. They could slap a targeting pod down in there and put a bomb on it.
Yep.
Hammer 3-4 was doing that mission. Gold Fingers was doing that mission when he got schwacked by an SA-6. So really difficult mission, not a high probability because our ranging solution wasn't very good. We had a large ellipse error around what we were looking at just because of the limitation of the sensors. But all that was happening. The big difference for us is the Block 50s didn't have NVGs. So we were flying around without gogs on, without lights at night, and we typically had to fly some type of radar trail pattern. So our wingmen were unbelievable to be able to stay in position and do that. Meanwhile, you were protecting guys that were flying line abreast in the CGs that were using NVGs. But they were still limited by their targeting pod. So this was pre-sniper,
Lantern.
It was a lantern, right? So it was not a very good targeting pod. So all these things are kind of, it's like when we go back to the beginning, we had a dip in technology while we continued to work tactics, and then technology started coming back up again. Now we got good pods, we got good weapons, we got NVGs, we got links, all those types of things that start building your situational awareness. But if you don't have those things, how do you work around that until you can be more effective? Air-to-air attack, and do we use air-to-air attack anymore? I don't know. We use it like crazy.
No, actually. I use it. I turned it on yesterday for a BFM sortie for no reason. But yeah. So all right. So I have a couple. So when we're kind of looking at what the outcome of the bombing campaign is overall the conditions that NATO and the UN wanted was Slobodan Milosevic did end up capitulating, and now it ended the bombing campaign. Not all conditions were met, not all objectives were met, but as far as just the bombing campaign, we always talk about it does matter, not in this regard, what we think about conflicts geopolitically or politically, but you guys were told to go do a mission, and you guys did the mission. And so what came out of this is the number of SAMs is difficult that were destroyed or is difficult to find, but overall 3 fighters were shot down, 3 fighters were damaged, a couple helicopters. There's one in particular that I'm going to ask a question and a quick follow on is with you guys now, the second campaign, the second operation, if you will, where LO platforms were present, kind of like stealth technology existed. What type of LO support that we can talk about in this kind of environment? But were there the LO platform F-117 B2? You're talking about not highlighting them. We got Vega 3-1 shot down on 24 March 99. So sorry, 27 March. So, how did they get a stealth aircraft? This whole thing is ridiculous. In an F-35 kind of mentality, it's just there's no way they had the technology to kill an F-117 with an SA-3. What contributing factors that we had? Was it ROE? Was it support? Was it flying the same strike routings with these guys over and over? What kind of things led to an LO platform getting shot down by a nation and a system that we thought didn't necessarily have the capability to do so?
Great question. I don't know if I have the answer. I can tell you the rumors. So it's just, it's just word of mouth.
No, it's Blank's take on Vega 3-1.
Yeah, so they're looking in the right place at the right time. Happens to see the door open. He breaks his RCS. They get a hit, and they're good enough. I'm sure there's a lot of luck, but they kind of knew where to look, and that was enough for them to get a guided missile towards him. I don't know all the details behind it. I'm sure some of it's still classified, but it was not because, from my opinion, it was not because we had highlighted his route. Let me put it that way.
Yeah.
Everything we were doing was trying to be the aluminum. We were basically big clouds of chaff trying to draw the fires away from those. So it was purely a lucky BB.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
And sometimes that happens. It's kind of one of those where you say, like, stealth technology is a nice to have, and it makes you incredibly survivable, but it does not make you invincible. So, like, when you're talking about how to provide seed support for LO platforms or anything like that, is the tactics are still overall the same. You generally need to still be in good position with if you're going with suppression, short harm time of flight, all the things that we harp on whether, like, you are executing sound seed tactics, and just being in position to actually employ and support the protected entity, in this case maybe an LO platform. But you put people into harm's way, sometimes you get harmed. And so, like, that's kind of the mentality. And we had an LO shootdown. We learned lessons, and we learned lessons from it, things that we take. So that shootdown has led to some things from an F-35 perspective. Is just like, okay, how do we prevent that in the future? And then an understanding of the fact that maybe this IADS can see you, whether a specific system can see you is a different story altogether. But you're not completely invisible to everything. And then there are certain times where you're incredibly vulnerable, and that can happen. And so you have to still have seed game plans for some of these. And then my follow-on question is, was there any ROE in the conflict that was either degrading your guys' effectiveness or anything like that? Because what we kind of saw Vietnam, that was the case. Initially, until the first SA-2 shot down the first aircraft, they didn't want to kill radar sites because they thought the Russians were there. And they were saying, if we blow up a fan song and kill some Russians, that can escalate the conflict to an unacceptable manner, and we don't want to do that. But then once an SA-2 shot down somebody, they kind of took the gloves off a little bit. Iraq, Desert Storm, anything in Iraq is bad.
Yep.
Kill it.
How about it?
Was that the case in Allied Force, or what kind of ROE were you guys under, and were there any restrictions at all?
The big ROE that I remember for employing harms, at least, obviously dropping bombs is a completely different thing. Deconfliction and positive ID, all those types of things. Shooting the harms, the big one was making sure it didn't flex into another country. So If you turned eastbound and you're shooting towards Bulgaria, we always had to have in our mind where we were in relationship to the border with other friendlies or non-belligerents, and make sure that our harm was going to land in the bad guy land. So how you did that was, how far down, how low was it on your harm sensor? Harm is a sensor. Did you have ranging on targeting pod? Could you compare that to the map and make sure it was going to be there? And then there was functionality in the harm that was actually brought in during the war from the test guys that allowed us to generate a geofence, if you will, to try and force the harm to stay within a certain area. So even if it did flex, it wouldn't flex out into somebody else, a non-belligerent area, a neutral country. So that was always a concern. That was the one ROE that kind of made it difficult sometimes, because the Serbs would operate close to the borders in the mountainous terrain. And mountainous terrain obviously adds more complexity to it, because if they're hiding behind, there's the shadow, the harm may not see the emissions. So you had to be in the right position to shoot into a valley on the other side, so you'd actually see the emitter, versus having your harm hit a mountaintop en route to the target. So all those those things all kind of weighed their way in there. And then of course there's always ambiguities you had to deal with. Am I seeing an SA-6, or am I seeing something that looks like an SA-6? Can I isolate it? And how do I isolate it? I have a hard targeting system. I have a HAZ. I have my RWR. I have my eyeballs. I have offboard. So if I can correlate all those and I can say, yep, that is definitely an SA-6, then that was another ROE measure that we had to fulfill.
Did you have some Army like Patriots out there as well, or like did you guys have blue-gray emitters that were kind of out there that you saw as well, or not? I didn't see that in any of my much.
No, I don't remember seeing anything that we had to worry about flexing to the wrong surface threat unless we were pointing back maybe towards BH, Sarajevo. I don't know. I can't remember if Sarajevo had Patriots, but you had Apaches kind of working along the borderline with Macedonia and Kosovo. And certain variants of the Apache can give off an emission that might be an ambiguity, right? So if you saw that, so you see that thing working at low altitude, and he's not moving very fast, could you range him in and could you theoretically shoot? I think we were pretty aware when those guys were flying, so that wasn't a big deal, but definitely something to consider, right? Slow flying aircraft that could have show up as an emitter.
Yeah, I think we're as I talked to some of the guys like Desert Storm, and then definitely in Iraq, is we're pretty, I wouldn't say 2 for 2, if you will, on conflicts or anything like that, but shooting a harm that hits a Patriot. So kind of knowing where those things are is incredibly important as a Weasel as well, especially if you're supporting a ground objective. So you're conducting offensive counter air, but you're also having to keep a little bit of SA and situational awareness, on where the ground force is. Not necessarily in this campaign as it stands or as it stood, but like knowing where the friendlies are, knowing where they aren't, and then now being able to employ, because there might be a ton of emitters. And kind of what we're seeing in the Ukrainian-Russia conflict is you have the same SAM systems on both sides. Oh. It's like both guys are out there. Like that one is mind-boggling to me. I would not want to be in that environment and be a Weasel. Well, I actually would. I actually would like to be in that environment and be a Weasel, but that would be a difficult environment to be in to kind of have ambiguity processing and kind of going from there. But right. All right, so there we are. It is May 2nd, 1999. So I'll put a little bit of framework kind of going into here. Blake is out there flying. What ended up happening overall is there's a strike package going into Obrava Airfield. And it's a pretty significant strike night, if you will. And what ends up happening, I'll let Blink tell the actual story. But I know what he probably would leave out is the fact that this mission ended up, Blake was awarded the Silver Star. So you were awarded a Silver Star for this mission. You and your Weasel package ended up killing multiple destroying multiple SA3s in support of the strike package. And it was a successful strike into a very dense, high threat environment. So with that, Blink, kind of talk to us what led to that mission, the mission planning, and then overall just what happened in as much detail as you want to get into.
Yeah, you bet. So that's an interesting time of the war because, typically you start getting a little complacent because we've been doing this now for 6 weeks. We are now into the phase of the war when we were talking about before where we were flowing with them. Now we're doing the back and forth kill box type of missions, if you will. So we're supporting 2 different packages, an A package and a C package. And then we've got buddies that are covering the B and the D package. So we're multiple engagements like that. So it's nighttime, full moon. Fingers had just been shot down. So everybody's up and running, looking to take another shot, trying to get down some NATO aircraft. And we flow into the area just before the strike package, the first strike package, NATO package. Had some Brit Tornadoes. I think there were Canadian F-18s in there, and a couple others, and they were going to take out military targets in the area around the airfield. So we set up our package initially as a counter-rotating, just a standard rotating cap located in the same position, about 10 to 12 miles at the front of the cap from where we think the surface threats are. And we got a pretty good look down. The full moon was a problem because it was right behind us. So if you're looking at the airfield and we're capping here, the full moon's right behind us. So I should have picked that up in my mission planning. I didn't think about that until we got airborne. I was like, oh, that's not good. So we're in the cap, and an SA3 comes up, launches a salvo. I directed my number 3 guy, Gus, to engage him. And when that happened, Gus actually became the engaged fighter. So he immediately went into his glib. His wingman, as you remember, is flying radar trail with no NVGs, no lights. So he follows them to give them mutual support. So there's no harms available to turn and put on the sight. So on that first one, I put the max G I could on the aircraft, turned it around, and laid a harm down as quick as I could into that area. And I don't know if that one actually hit. It definitely forced them to shut down. So because we didn't see an explosion, we saw the missile come up. It did not explode like we expected it would at our altitude. And so I said, hey, this is probably not the best place for us to be capping. So we kind of reformed everybody, figured out where we were on the Victor radio. Hey, I'm over here at altitude, blah, blah, blah. And we quickly repositioned ourselves away from the moon being behind us. And then we got repositioned for the second wave of those strikers coming in. Same thing, about a minute from the strikers coming in, we're getting really serious about what's out there. And we get engaged again by, I don't know if it's the same site, but a site that was very close. Laid down a harm, my remaining harm, shot that. At the time, our tactic was to try and unload the wingman's aircraft first. Let them shoot their harms first, because they were task saturated, just trying to station keep.
Absolutely.
So, in the case of this type of scenario, where the flight lead had the best SA, because I'm actually looking out and listening to what's going on, I was in a better position. So, I'm basically Winchester on my harms now. And the one thing that we pulled out of this, well, there's a couple lessons, was look at the moon. Look at where the AAA is, because as soon as you start reacting and as soon as you shoot that harm, everybody in the world knows where you are. Right. There's a big plume. So, we always talk about safe escape maneuvers when you're dropping bombs. Same thing when you're shooting air-to-air weapons or air-to-surface weapons. Launch that harm, get away from that site as quickly as from that launch point, and then reposition yourself. So that was a big lesson. We learned that one over and over. It seemed like every night was, holy crap, every time I shot, all the AAA came up. AAA didn't have that high of altitude, but if you're on the downside of your glib maneuver, you're now getting in that area where you could theoretically be hit by the golden BB. So that was that. The thing I was most happy about was all my guys stayed in position. They all kept sensors downrange when we needed them to. They repositioned without all those extra sensors on, NVGs and things. And we got the strike package in. They hit all their targets, as far as we know, and they all got out of the target area without anybody jettisoning weapons or getting shot down or hit. So that was a successful mission as from a Weasels perspective. I think one of our guys might have jettisoned his tanks. I can't remember if that was that mission or another one, but we might have lost some tanks, but that was for us. That wasn't for the strike package.
That's right.
And then we followed him out, went back to the tanker, got some gas, and came back. The one thing I will also say that was a lesson learned about that same time was, we're getting longer days. And this was a lesson I think the A-10s also ran into, is nautical twilight is not the same as twilight when you're at altitude. So we always looked at sunrise and said, hey, we want to be out of the bad guy area at sunrise. But we were looking at sunrise based on the surface of the Earth, not being at 25,000 feet. So even though it's dark on the ground, they can still see us up there because we're starting to catch twilight at 20,000 feet. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a huge lesson learned. You could have your lights off all day long, but all it takes is for the guy to look up and see you, plain as day.
Yeah, that's incredibly interesting, because another thing that I feel is getting lost in as we get farther and farther away from conflicts that we have to think about these things. Yeah. And as we get farther away from people who have actually been there, like yourself, like I'm incredibly proud to wear a Weasel patch. I've never done it in combat. Readily admit that. And so kind of when I'm teaching weaseling is from guys like yourself that have taught me how to do it. And then also kind of more from my A-10 background is tactical weather. Right. And so it's okay, that was something in the A-10 that was briefed every single day. Why did we brief that? Because I was like, okay, I want to know if I can actually see this tank at what range because of transmissivity and humidity and all these different things, and sun angle and how long are the shadows, all these different things. But then when I became into the Weasel world, I was just like, okay, all those same things apply. But we're just starting to lose some of those things. It's like, okay, we're going to go out in the dead of night. We're going to go out here, but we forget that if I fly literally through the moon, I'm now the bat signal. Like as I'm kind of going in, and you don't even think about that. And then now when you guys are kind of thinking about this as like the Vietnam stats, if you will, is 88% of shoot downs via AAA. Were you guys also attempting to target like AAA radars, or if you could actually see the guns, like would you go drop bombs on those guns, or was that not like didn't have the weapons? It was like avoid AAA, kill the SAMs. Was that kind of your game?
Yeah, stay above the AAA if you could. I think the CGs might have had a tertiary target, like if they were hunting a SAM and they saw a AAA piece nearby, they could take it. If they could identify, but it was not an attempt to try and take out a AAA. It was just too hard to target.
All works. Yeah, no, that's valid. Because also, I mean, you're going to spend all day long killing the density of AAA, specifically in a place that wants to be defended around an airfield. So that's kind of what a lot of people are kind of talking about. I sorry, it just jumped in my head. My brain works like a squirrel sometime, or sees squirrels at times. But with Maverick shooting at giraffes is hilarious. Crazy. Because when I was going to Osan, I had to do. I was just finished up in my time in the A-10 because, of course, that airplane's going away forever. Yep. And and I had to go through the Maverick upgrade. It was like I had to go like learn, and I was just like, "What do you mean Maverick upgrade?" Like, this is just a weapon. Like, this is actually the bread and butter weapon. I was like, like with the giraffe, I was like, could have asked the A-10 guys to shoot giraffes for you. I'm sure they would have enjoyed that.
Oh, they would have been happy
to. Absolutely. So now, like, obviously hearing these Weasel stories and like going out and doing it, the theme that has come through, and I asked this question, it was offered up by Curly and Lucky and some of these guys. But you're actively getting shot at. Fingers had just gotten shot down by an SA-6. When you guys are actively getting shot at, what, if you can harken back to this, like what is going through your mind when that is happening? Because you said what you were most proud of is like your guys stayed where they were supposed to be. They executed the tactics. They repositioned. They employed weapons. They kept sensors down track. They supported the strike package. Like,
right.
The Weasel standard every single day when we go out to train to this. So even in an environment where you're like, oh man, these things have demo pro that they can shoot down an F-16. Mm-hmm. And we're in this very chaotic environment. Was it just like training? Did you do anything different that you hadn't done 40, 50, 60, 70, 100 times at weapons school or in training? Or was that going through your mind, or like what was going through Blink's mind when this is occurring, of like what radio calls did you make, and did it look like training, or was it wholly different?
I would say it was different for a couple of reasons. Is you can simulate all you want, but until someone's actually shot at you, you will 100%. Never get that pucker factor, right? So there's definitely the guys always talk about when you eject, you have this temporal distortion where everything kind of slows down. I felt that in the cockpit. I think a lot of guys I talked to had those same things. Air-to-air engagements, the C models are shooting down. They're getting temporal distortion as they can visualize everything that happened. So temporal distortion definitely kicked in. The next thing is, I don't know if I've ever told anybody this, so maybe this is news. When I fenced in...
Breaking news.
Breaking news. When I fenced in, I had not gone to ARM. So I was still in a simulate mode. So I got everything locked up and pushed the pickle button. Nothing happened. I'm like, holy crap, I got a hang fire. And then for some reason, I went over and immediately went to ARM, handed off again and shot. So, and this is why I say you get complacent, as you start doing these things, you start getting complacent. The checklist mentality has got to be there, man. You got to run through the fence check. Everything you do has got to be muscle memory.
Yeah.
So you don't forget the basics, right? So it didn't take long, but it's just enough for you to go, oh, what's going on? It kind of slows you down a little bit. So, yeah, I would say that's probably the main thing.
Yeah, because I mean, talking to other Weasels, what they were saying is just like it's the most chaotic thing. Like Weasels that have done it for real and gotten shot at, they say it's the most chaotic thing, and then they go, somebody that told me this story was they were like, I don't even remember shooting the harm. I had to come back and look at the tapes to determine if I did it right. And they were like, turns out I did it exactly how I'd done it in training. And it was just like, oh, and they just go. So I was so locked in on getting shot, this environment that I'd never been in before, but then like the actual weapons employment, aside from maybe not being in Master Arm. But again, the times you've done it has not been in Master Arm. Has kind of been the trend that I've kind of noticed. So when you're in that environment and that harm comes off your jet, was that the first live harm that you had ever shot?
No, I'd shot some in training at Hill. Actually, we shot some out at the Uter when I was at Missouri. We deployed and shot some at the Uter. So I had at least seen what it looks like, how it's going to come off. So big thumbs up for Wes up and the air to ground guys doing their testing. And also earlier in the combat, I had shot a couple pet shots, just lobbing them out there to suppress. So I had a pretty good idea what to expect. But man, that thing rips. Oh, I shot one in Iran in Iraq too. Almost Iran. I shot one in Iraq back in '96, and that one came off pretty fast. So nice. Definitely something you want to try and get your young guys through if they haven't employed live weapons, especially a forward firing weapon, to get them through. At least do it once before you get them into a combat scenario.
Yep.
I'll tell you another thing. It's we talk about weaseling and shooting harms and all that, but I talked about Bill Thomas earlier, Sluggo Thomas. Reminds me about that same time. He was on exchange with the Dutch, and so he was flying Vipers with the Dutch, and the Dutch were north of in the north part of Serbia at the time. It was about the same time, early May, and his wingman got shot at by a SAM. And Sluggo, because he had a Weasel background when we were at Nassau and some other places, he was smart enough to figure out that if he distracted the Weasel or the SAM operator, that he could get them to come off of him. There's probably some great stories out there. So he went down low altitude, started ejecting flares at night, and drew all the fires towards him. And his wingman flew out of the thing and got away. And then Sluggo, obviously got away. But what a really cool story, because he didn't have anything to shoot back, but he had that mentality of going, hey, look at me. Take a shot. Take your best shot at me. I want to save my buddy out there who's who's in trouble. So different mentality. Pretty cool story.
Rodeo clown.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and that's a great segue to kind of our last topic I want to kind of get into today is something that the Vietnam guys talked about was the discussion amongst the Weasels about the fact that we are not the mission. Like, the Weasels are not the mission. We are a support asset. I say it all the time. I say we're a support asset, a support mission and a support asset by design, and damn proud of it. Yep. And so the job is to facilitate the actual mission objective accomplishment of mission objectives, and to ensure that the people that are accomplishing the mission go home at night. And that is something that we are incredibly proud of. But that is a different mentality than folks going out there like doing strategic bombing or anything like that, of like, come support me to accomplish the mission, versus, yep, we will be there for you 100% of the time, every time. If you could talk about your Blink's thoughts on just being a Weasel and the kind of the mentality, the spirit, the history, the culture, and the fact that there are only a few things in the military where a kindred spirit and like personified with a patch on your shoulder, like being a Weasel, that goes back to Vietnam and the guys that started it. Just your thoughts on that and what it means to you and what you kind of see what it meaning to the community.
Yeah. Lot in that question. So
sorry.
I think it's a great question. So initially it is the mindset, right? Anybody you talk to as a Weasel is going to say it's a mindset. You have to get over the fact that you're supporting the guy carrying the ball. So who's got the ball today? Who's the supported entity? I am always going to be I'm always going to be supporting that guy, whether I'm doing air to air or if I'm doing seed or anything else. I want to make sure that guy gets into the target area and can take care of the target that's going to change. Could change the character of the war, right? He could be taking out the ace of spades. Who knows? So that mentality is always, I want the bad guys looking at me, targeting me. I want to draw attention away from the guy carrying the football if I can. And I want to be able to put a weapon on if I can. If we could do that whole thing and stay outside of the threat rings and not put ourselves in harm's way, great. But there's probably going to be the day when maybe not early on, we're going to lob stuff at range. That's not really weaseling. That's just lobbing stuff at range. But once we start chewing away the IADs, getting closer, and now we're down to more tactical SAMs, there is going to be some weaseling going on. Whether you're going to pull out the gun, and call up air-to-air, maybe that's the only way you can get to the gun. The fastest way you get to the gun, and you're going to strafe a site to keep their heads down, or if you're going to drop a bomb on them, whatever those mentalities are, whatever that mentality is, I think is huge. So that is something I think we are always at risk of losing, because we're always one war away from changing our tactics. So we're still kind of living the Afghanistan, Iraq, global war on terrorism. But there's going to be a day when you and your guys are going to have to pull out the knife and get in there in a telephone booth and go to take it to the enemy. So how you do that? A lot of that's going to be ROE. A lot of it's weapons. A lot of it is sensors, but really comes down to the mindset of the pilot, the guys doing the job. Yeah,
absolutely. And that's kind of that additionally is what appealed to me, kind of being a Weasel, is it reminded me of kind of the A-10 mentality of like the mission is the 18-year-old with the rifle.
Yeah.
And just saying like the mission is the Strike Eagle with the Strike Eagle with the bombs, or the B-52 with the JASM, or the B-2 with the penetrating weapon that's going to end the war, or kick the door in and things like that. So that mentality, that emotional attachment to a mission is prevalent in the Weasel community, and something that I really enjoyed. And that connection to guys like yourself and the guys like the Vietnam era guys, that you can get together, kind of like you're talking about in the Squadron bar, and you're all kind of talking the same language, and you're all kind of just have kind of the same mentality, and like you kind of know what you're getting when you're talking to a Weasel, which is really cool. Kind of from there. So I appreciate the words, and kind of over to you for last things, specifically, like from your career ending in 2013 and what you've seen, and then now like you're not necessarily an outsider perspective, but kind of removed from the situation. If you were back in the Tomahawks today as Tomahawk 1, and they're teaching a guy like me coming through the weapons school who's never done seed before, like what would you tell those guys on how to do this mission or how to approach this mission that you kind of see potentially for the future fight, and how that kind of looks, and how do you teach that when you don't have the experience of a guy like yourself who has done it in combat, but you still have to go teach the mission and prepare a squadron? Do you have anything that you would impart on the Weasels of today as we finish this up?
Yeah. Well, thanks for the opportunity. I think one thing is be creative, right? So we have some unbelievable technology, and I don't think we've pushed it to the limits. What can we do differently? And let guys, especially commanders and senior patch wearers, let the young guys be creative on the way they're going to approach these problems. Give them some tough problems, see how they solve them. Some of that stuff might have to be done in a simulator, so you can practice full operations and get the ranges that you want to achieve. So I'd say that's one. And the other one was go back and read your Weasel history. I know you harp on that. I think it's fun to go back and read what these guys are doing. What can we do based on those original ideas, those original tactics? How have they morphed over the years, and what are they doing now? And how are you going to beat that problem in the future? Chances are you guys are going to have a lot tougher problem than we had. And to have the cojones to stick your nose in there against some pretty impressive threats. My hat's off to you guys, but definitely be innovative. There's all kinds of ways to solve these problems that have not been thought of.
Awesome. Well, Blink, I can't tell you how much I appreciate your time, the words, the stories, and all these different things, and what we're what I'm trying to accomplish here with telling this story and the evolution of seed across the years. So I thank you very much, and to all of our listeners, we appreciate the support. Check out the newsletter in the caption, like, subscribe, all of that social media stuff, and listen to this. And I hope you enjoy listening to Blink and myself as much as I enjoyed listening to the stories as well. And I'll end it with how I'm ending all of these Evolution of Seed series episodes. Weasels have been around for a long time. Not all the weasels made it home. So they didn't all make it home because they go out and they are a support asset. They're there to ensure that everybody else comes home. And sometimes they didn't make it home themselves. So to all the weasels that went before that didn't ever make it home, to those guys, we think about you guys every time we put on a weasel patch. And this is kind of why we do what we do. So thanks to those guys. And Blank, any final words before we say goodbye?
No, sir. Thanks for the opportunity. And here to the fallen. Let's not forget those guys.
All right.
Great